Welcome to another episode of Jing's Health Journey. Today, we'll be talking about Dr. Alex Natera's strength baseline for running fast. There will be 3 parts to this video. In the first part, I'll go through a specific type of strength testing enabled by this equipment from Vault that helps you fast forward years in training. In the second part, I'll go through my own results from the testing, and we'll also walk through the results of my friend Dr. Fu-Zhen Lin so that you can have more context. In the last part, we'll look at the possible follow-ups after knowing the test results, and this is probably the most important part, because if you know the test results and you don't do anything, then it's not going to be very useful. With that said, let's move into part 1, which is how this equipment called Force Decks can help you save plenty of time. A good thing to note is that it saves you time in more ways than the context of this video, and for today, I'm just going to highlight 3 main points. The first way it saves you time is during testing. Without this equipment, if you want to do a maximum strength test, be it for performance purposes or to track how well you're aging, you will need to do 1 rep of an exercise, increase the weight for that exercise, and then do the rep again. And you have to repeat this process up to failure. If you are a beginner in the gym, this process can take you 20 minutes or more, and there's also a risk of injury if your technique or form needs improvement. Using the plates, all you have to do is to hop on, push or pull against something that doesn't move, and the sensors will pick up your maximum strength. This makes the whole process not only faster, but because there's less emphasis on technique, safer. In the same vein, if you calculate the time difference, in the past you can take more than 20 minutes, now you take less than a minute, that's more than 90% time savings. On top of that, because you can test for maximum strength so quickly, you can do multiple tests within a session. More about the advantage in a minute. For now, let's move on to the second way it saves you time, and that is during training. If you look at the way we tested for maximum strength in our previous example, you would realize that we were exerting force, but there was no external movement. This sort of exerting force but no movement kind of training is in layman terms called isometric training. This is the opposite of other types of strength training which has movement, for example, eccentric, concentric, etc. And for the purpose of this video, we will just classify the entire group as traditional strength training. Now, if you compare traditional strength training where you utilize dynamic movements versus isometric training, you would realize a couple of differences. The main one I would like to highlight here in context of time saving is that in traditional training, you might only experience high levels of muscular tension for half a second during each rep. In contrast, for isometric training, you can experience 3 to 6 seconds of maximal muscular tension in just 1 repetition. Coupled with things I'll talk about later in the video, like lesser fatigue and faster recovery, this lowers the overall time needed to gain strength, power, etc. Dr. Natera, whose baselines we are talking about in this video, puts overall time savings at more than 60% if you compare isometric strength training versus traditional strength training. To be specific, he stated this in his online course on isometric training, which was recently released. This course spans more than 10 hours, and it also features the work of other researchers and practitioners. Special mention to Head of Strength Conditioning at Singapore Sports Institute, Dr. Danny Lam, because I'll be referring to lots of his work later in this video. If you'd like to find out more about the course, I've put a link in the description of this video. This is unfortunately not an affiliate link because Dr. Natera and I are not partners yet, but still, I highly recommend you check out the course. Moving on, the third way isometric training can save you plenty of time, and this is the one that I feel is the most impactful, has got to do with Dr. Alex Natera's work as well as the equipment provider Vault. Basically, there are now baselines and normative data you can tag your results to, and from there, you can determine which areas of the body you need to work on. Now that you can know what are the things you should focus on, many of the clients I've tested have said if they had such data in the past, they could have saved years in training. Instead, they have been working on things that might be barely moving the needle. If you're optimizing for sports or healthy aging, I'm sure that in the years ahead, you don't want to look back and say, hey, I've been wasting a good part of my time in the gym, and instead, you want to go, I've been optimizing my training, fast-forwarding how fast I get results, and doing the things that have maximum impact. Now, if you're doing rehab, this might be even more crucial to you because you will not only be saving time and effort, but also, to a certain extent, money. With that, we move on to the second part of this video, and in this part, I'll be comparing my own results to baselines found by Dr. Natera. For more context, I also brought in my friend Dr. Fu-Zhen Lin, and this is so that you can see how the values differ for each individual. Dr. Fu-Zhen Lin is an orthopedic surgeon, and in the past, we have worked on a video before. We talked about running, OH, and arthritis on an episode of Health Gigs, and if you're interested in those topics, feel free to check out the link which I'll put somewhere on the screen. Now, just to quickly go through what the run-specific isometric tests are, they comprise of 3 exercises. Firstly, the ankle iso push, where you're doing a single leg calf raise. Secondly, a knee iso push, where you're doing a single leg squat from your running mid-stance position. And lastly, a hip iso push where you're doing a single leg hip thrust, again from a running mid-stance position. As to why these 3 tests and why running mid-stance position, this is because we want to test for your maximum strength while biasing your calf, hamstrings, and quads. For context, research has shown that isometric strength training is effective in improving isometric force production at a joint angle that the muscles are trained at, as well as joint angles that were not included in the training intervention. With that said, it's still a single limb assessment, so you have to test yourself on both the right side and the left side. After testing more than 1,000 athletes as well as considering what the muscle groups have to do during the course of running, Dr. Natera has established the baselines for normal, good, and excellent for each test. If you look at my results, you will be able to tell that for 4 of the 6 assessments done, I'm at least hitting the normal baselines. The 2 areas which I do not hit the normal baselines are the left knee iso push and the left ankle iso push. And among those 2 results, the one that came more of a surprise to me was the ankle iso push, where I had 18% asymmetry if I compare the left side versus the right side. In the past, a physio told me that I should work on my right calf strength, and I'm not sure whether she's wrong or it has been 4 years and I've been doing some training that has worked, but I'm still under the impression that I need to work more on my right calf strength. Now that I have this data, I have more clarity on what I should really work on. Coming to Jen's results, you can see that his hip iso push is pretty decent. But for the other 2 areas, there's room for improvement. What's surprising for him though was that his left knee performed better than his right knee, and this is because in the past, he has had an ACL injury on his leg. Similar to me, he was still under the impression that he should be working on his left quad strength. But one thing he said is that the data doesn't lie. In fact, we did multiple times of the knee iso push just to make sure that the results are accurate, to his disbelief. For wider understanding, we also did other assessments like the isometric mid-thigh pull, which is a test for maximum strength, as well as the counter movement jump, which is a test of your explosiveness. From there, we were able to determine a dynamic strength index, which is basically a ratio between how much force you're outputting for the isometric mid-thigh pull versus the counter movement jump. And using that ratio, we are able to determine how much of your strength you are converting to your explosiveness. The whole point of all that is so that we are able to tell should he work more on his strength or his power or do both training concurrently. This is part of what I mentioned earlier in the video, finding out what things to prioritize on so that you can save time during training. Now, we are running this test because I offer them as a service, so if you're interested to find out more, please feel free to get in touch. With that, we move on to the third part of the video, which is what can we do now that we know how we fare against the baselines? To answer that question, the first thing you need to consider is, do you want to do isometric strength training, which to a certain extent will require all these force measuring devices, or do you want to do traditional strength training? If you want to do traditional strength training, it is pretty simple. To improve your quad strength, you would do things like leg press, squats, etc. If you want to do isometric strength training, then you'll be doing things like what you did in the test, a knee iso push, followed by its progression. I'll leave the exercise progression for traditional strength training out of this video because that's not the focus. And instead, I'll talk about the progression for isometric strength training. This is also partly because, like what I mentioned earlier in the video, isometric strength training can be more time efficient. Additionally, in this case, with the context being running, there are at least 3 more upsides to utilizing isometric training. Firstly, as stated in a paper in 2019, isometric strength training has been shown to induce less fatigue and greater outcomes in certain areas than dynamic strength training. More importantly, these outcomes benefited sports-related dynamic performance, such as in running, jumping, and cycling. Secondly, in a 2022 paper, researchers shared that isometric strength training not only improves muscular force production, but also results in greater tendon stiffness. The same study also showed that plyometric training and isometric strength training resulted in similar improvement in 2.4 km time trial and maximal aerobic speed, but participants who performed isometric strength training had greater improvement in running economy. Lastly, researchers also shared that isometric strength training does not result in high impact force and is often used in injury rehabilitation. Now, if you consider the prevalence of running injuries, isometric strength training can be a better option for prehab as well as rehab. Separate from those research, mainly by Dr. Danny Lam, I now refer back to Dr. Alex Natera's online course because in that course, he mentions the progressions for isometric exercises. Now, if you were to do traditional strength training, your progression from strength exercises to running might look something like leg extensions, squats, speed squats, hops, etc. And this is because you move towards a movement that is more and more similar to running. Likewise, the progression for isometric strength training. But in this case, you'll be using data to inform you whether you should move from one progression to the next one to make things not only more efficient, but also safer. I'll cover the whole progression in another video, but to give you a glimpse of it, I've been practicing two different types of isometric workouts for my left quad and left calf. Firstly, I've done the push exercises for 4 weeks. That's the knee iso push as well as the ankle iso push. And after the 4 weeks, I did a test again and found out that I have reached the normal baselines. From there, I went into ballistic iso push, which is basically going into an iso push exercise as fast as I can. Again, the whole idea is just like the traditional strength training progression. You do isometric exercises that is more and more similar to running. One thing I thought would be good to bring up again is that, as mentioned earlier in the video, isometric strength training can replicate the forces of running better. Coming back to how it has helped me so far, in the past 6 weeks, I have combined a maximum of 2 hours of running as well as a maximum of 1 hour in the gym to increase my VO2 max from 46.2 to 50.9. That's an increase of 4.7 with less than 3 hours of workout per week. Now, just to be transparent, I used to do triathlons competitively, and it might be a case of me having a decent base to start off from, as well as picking up things quicker than average. But it is also a case where, because of my layoff, as I started working out again, I had niggling plantar issues, which I resolved using strength training. That's a reason why I'm thankful for such baselines. And having said that, moving forward, I'll continue to document my journey towards better VO2 max as well as greater strength, because those two biomarkers are the greatest predictors of how long you're going to live, and hence what I peg my goals to. If you'd like to follow along, please feel free to subscribe. And as I've mentioned earlier in this video, if you'd like to find out how you fare against the baselines as well as what to do in terms of isometric training, please feel free to reach out for testing as well as personal training. Those are services my company provides. We have helped many clients alleviate their injuries and run better by using the baselines. You can check out Google reviews for updates, and I'm going to show on the screen a few clients who shared about their experiences on LinkedIn. Subscribe for more client stories in future videos. If not, that's all for now. Till next time, take care.